Luis Armando Albino was just 6 years old when he was taken while at the park with his brother Roger. He remained missing despite the efforts of Oakland police and the FBI. His niece, Alita Aliquin, was determined to find him and got a big break after taking a DNA test online and matching with a man on the East Coast.
73 years. That's how long one man lived without knowing the truth. For more than 7 decades, he believed he was just another boy from the East Coast, a son, a Marine, a firefighter, a father, and a grandfather. But then, a single DNA test unraveled everything. The parents he thought were his own, weren't. His entire childhood, stolen. His entire identity, a lie. And buried in the silence of history, a heartbreaking truth emerged. He wasn't just any man, he was a missing child, kidnapped in 1951 from a California park, ripped from his family's arms, and hidden in plain sight for a lifetime. This is the story of Luis Albino, the boy who vanished at 6 years old, and the grandfather who was found 73 years later. A story of loss, of hope, of family, and of the haunting question, how many more stolen lives are still out there, waiting to be found? You're watching The Found Files. These are the stories the world almost forgot. But if you don't hit subscribe, if you don't share them, they disappear again, into silence. Don't let that happen. Subscribe now, and help keep the lost, found. Before the tragedy, there was only a boy. A little boy named Luis Armando Albino. Born in Puerto Rico, brought to California by his mother, Antonia, in search of a better life. It was 1951 in West Oakland. A neighborhood alive with the sounds of children running through Jefferson Square Park, the smell of home-cooked meals drifting from apartment windows, and the hum of working-class families holding tight to the American dream. To his mother, Antonia, Luis was her joy. To his older brother, Roger, he was more than just a sibling, he was a shadow that followed him everywhere, a best friend who laughed at his jokes, who raced him down sidewalks, who sat shoulder to shoulder as they dreamed about what life would become. They were inseparable. 2 brothers, bound by innocence and blood. But in those fleeting days of childhood, no one could have imagined that one of their games of tag, one of their afternoons at the park, would be the last time Antonia would ever see her little boy again. For the Albino family, what began as a simple day in the park, would soon unravel into a nightmare that would last an entire lifetime. February 21, 1951. It began as an ordinary afternoon in Oakland, California. 6-year-old Luis was at Jefferson Square Park, playing with his 10-year-old brother Roger. The sun was dipping, casting long shadows across the field. Roger remembers the sound of laughter, the crunch of dirt under their shoes, the rhythm of a childhood that felt safe. But safety can vanish in an instant. As the boys played, a woman approached. She wore a bandana. She spoke to Luis in Spanish, soft words, familiar, comforting. She promised candy, a treat, a kindness that masked something darker. Roger, just a child himself, saw his brother take her hand. He thought nothing of it, until they kept walking. And walking. And then, they were gone. Minutes passed. Then panic. Roger searched frantically. He shouted Luis's name. But there was no answer. By the time their mother Antonia arrived, her youngest son had vanished into thin air. Police swarmed the neighborhood. Witnesses described the woman in the bandana. But the leads went cold almost immediately. It was as if Luis had been swallowed whole by the city. For Roger, the guilt never faded. He was the last to see his brother. For Antonia, the grief became her shadow, every night waiting by the window, every morning checking with police, every holiday setting a place at the table for the boy who never came home. The Albino family's world shattered that day. A mother broken. A brother haunted. And a mystery that would remain unsolved for 73 years. While his family searched desperately, while his mother prayed for her son's return, little Luis Albino was being carried into another life. The woman who took him disappeared across the country. On the East Coast, Luis was raised by people he believed were his parents. Their names, their stories, their world, became his reality. And the truth of who he was slipped deeper into silence. He grew up like any other boy. He went to school. He laughed with friends. He celebrated birthdays his real family spent in mourning. As a young man, he joined the United States Marine Corps. He wore the uniform with pride. He would even serve during the Vietnam War, risking his life for a country he loved, never knowing he had been torn from his true family. After the war, he built another life. He became a firefighter, running into burning buildings to save others. Later, a father. A grandfather. From the outside, Luis's story was one of honor, service, and family. But to his mother Antonia, it was a lifetime of unanswered questions. To his brother Roger, it was 73 years of guilt and longing. And to Luis himself, it was a life lived under a name and a history that were never truly his. Luis had no idea. He carried no memory of the woman in the bandana, no clear trace of the park where his life was stolen. He was a missing child living in plain sight, his true identity buried under decades of silence. For 73 years, the truth lay buried. Luis lived a life unaware. His family carried grief with no answers. And it seemed the story was over, until one ordinary moment cracked it wide open. It wasn't a police investigation. It wasn't a hidden confession. It was a simple decision made by his niece, Alida Aliquin. She had grown up on the stories, her grandmother's endless mourning, her uncle Roger's quiet grief. Luis Albino, the boy who vanished. In 2020, out of curiosity, Alida took a DNA test. She wasn't searching for him. She wasn't chasing ghosts. It was just for fun. Just a way to learn more about her ancestry. But then, the results came back. And in those results was something impossible to ignore. A 22% match with a man she had never met. A man with no ties to her immediate family. A man living on the East Coast. And suddenly, the whispers of the past began to stir. Could this stranger be the missing boy? Could Luis still be alive? Alida dug deeper. She scoured old newspaper archives. She pieced together family trees. She compared photos. Every clue brought her closer to a chilling realization: the man in her DNA results was no stranger at all. It was her missing uncle, Luis. The boy was stolen from a California park in 1951. The boy her grandmother had never stopped looking for. The silence of 73 years was finally breaking. And what came next would shatter everything. A family's grief would meet its answer. And a man who thought he knew who he was, would discover he had been living a stolen life. When Alida Aliquin picked up the phone, she didn't know she was about to end 73 years of silence. On the other end of the line, a man who shared her DNA. A man who had been living under a different name, in a different world. Luis Albino. At first, he didn't believe it. How could he? For his entire life, he had been told a different story, raised by parents who were never really his. He thought he was theirs. He thought his past was ordinary. But science doesn't lie. And neither did the old newspapers Alida unearthed. Each record she found tightened the net, until the truth could no longer be ignored. Investigators cross-checked the DNA, the records, the timelines. Every piece lined up with haunting precision. The boy who disappeared in Oakland, California in 1951 was the same man living quietly in the Northeast today. Luis Albino was alive. And he had been hidden in plain sight for more than 7 decades. Imagine living your whole life under a name that was never yours. Imagine waking up one day to discover you were the center of one of America's longest unsolved kidnappings. For Luis, it wasn't just a revelation, it was the collapse of everything he thought he knew about himself. And for his family, the ones who had searched, who had wept, who had prayed, the revelation was something beyond words. A lifetime of pain was finally meeting the light of truth. The missing boy had been found. 73 years. That's how long it took for the Albino family's broken circle to close. For decades, Luis was only a memory, a photograph, a ghost in their family tree. Now, he was flesh and blood again. And at the center of it all, a quiet family reunion that carried the weight of generations. When Luis stepped into that room, there were no words. Only tears. Only trembling hands that reached for his, hands that had longed for 73 years to hold their missing brother, their uncle, their father's son. It wasn't just a reunion, it was a resurrection. A family, fractured by abduction, piecing itself back together at last. For Luis, the moment was overwhelming. The faces in front of him were strangers, yet, somehow, they were his blood. His people. His story. For the family, the reunion was both joy and sorrow. Joy that he had been found. Sorrow for all the lost years that could never be reclaimed. Birthdays missed. Holidays gone. Parents who died never knowing their son lived. But in that embrace, the pain and the silence gave way to something greater, hope. A reminder that even the longest separations can end. That even after 73 years, love does not forget. Luis Albino's story is more than a case of a missing child finally found. It is a lesson in the endurance of love. A family's grief stretched across 73 years, and still, their prayers were answered. For every Luis, there are countless others, children stolen, lives rewritten, families waiting for a call that may never come. These stories are not just history, they are happening right now, in silence, all around us. But here's the truth, without you, these stories fade. They vanish again into the dark. Families searching for hope are forgotten. That is why the Found Files exists, to make sure the lost are not erased, to keep their names alive, and to remind the world that even after decades, hope can return. So don't scroll away. Don't let Luis's story end here. If you don't subscribe, if you don't share these voices, they disappear again. Forgotten. Silenced. But with you, with every like, every share, every subscription, you are helping to bring the missing home. You are helping families heal. You are helping turn silence into truth.